So when it rains really hard, because we went during the monsoon season, when it rains really hard, kids are scared because the raindrops are mimicking the gunshot sounds. So till today, they're still afraid to hear raindrops because of what happened back in Tantlang.
Hello, welcome to the fourth episode of Talking Burma with the Burma Canadian Association of Ontario. I'm your host, Napas Dane, and I'll be interviewing Millen Kim. Millen Kim is a Chin youth from Vancouver, Canada, who recently engaged in a research study hosted by the Chin Youth Organization of North America in Mizoram, India, and along the border with Chin State. They looked at the impacts of the ongoing civil war and the influence of what's going on the humanitarian conditions on the ground. Please listen in to this fascinating conversations. Hi, Millen.
Hello, Napas.
I'm very pleased to have you. Maybe we can start off with you talking a little bit about what you do and the kind of work that you're doing right now.
For sure. Thanks for having me here, Napas. I am from Chin State, Burma, or Myanmar. My father is from the Tantlang Township and my mom is from the Phalam Township. I was born in Mizoram, India, and I lived in New Delhi for about 5 years before my family and I immigrated to Canada in 2008. So during my time in Canada, I finished my undergrad in political science at the University of British Columbia. And with my work with the Chin Youth Organization of North America, last year we took on a fieldwork internship for 6 weeks. This was my first time back in Mizoram and my second time back in Chin State, which was a very rewarding experience, I would say. I came back with a lot of more passion to work for our country. And Chin State, as you know, is Myanmar's highest poverty state as well. So there is not a lot of scholarship much done on Chin State, which is why we really wanted to push this research internship. So currently I am still working on expanding this research to hopefully have it continue after my term is over with CYONA.
Thank you for that. So can you talk a little bit about where you went and exactly what happened on the research trip and also some of the findings?
Yeah, for sure. Our research report is available on the CYONA.org, the full 43 pages. We landed in New Delhi first, where we visited a bunch of schools that were mainly refugees. All of these schools were very poorly functioned. We talked with teachers, we met with the students. Teachers expressed their concerns for long-term sustainability, really, with international funding, which is where majority of how they're able to continue schooling these refugee children. And then the kids there, the students there, all of them were just dreaming about moving to America, moving to a different world, and then coming back to fight and work for our people. And they're so young, but for them to be able to think something so big like that was it was really sad to see because the conditions were obviously not great. We then moved to Aizawl, the capital city of Mizoram, where we visited about 9 refugee camps located in that area. We also visited 6 Mizoram civil organizations and NGOs. We spoke with their leaders. We spoke with refugee camps leaders and the refugees themselves. We spent a lot of time in the Mizoram part where a lot of refugees were being placed. So we went to Longtlai, Siaha, all of that area. We visited every refugee camp possible if there was one. Spoke with all the people. Most refugee camps near Longtlai and Siaha, a lot of them were elders from the Muthupi township. So they spoke in Burmese, which was very difficult for those of us that couldn't speak Burmese. And so that communication gap was definitely a struggle that we had to navigate with. A lot of them were there since the beginning of the coup. So they've been living in Mizoram for about 3 to 4 years, living in the refugee camps that the Mizoram people helped build. Some refugee camps, they built it themselves, the refugees themselves, which was very impressive to see. Food-wise, healthcare-wise, very, very scarce, as you can imagine. Some refugee camps didn't have schools, so children couldn't go to schools. Some refugee camps in Mizoram had schools, but then they would have to walk an hour to get there. Healthcare was the biggest thing that we noticed anytime somebody was sick, they couldn't go into the main city to get treatment, or they didn't have money for medication. And what was interesting was a lot of these refugees from Matupi Township, they didn't have families from abroad that could send them money. In cases that we saw in like Long Tlai, we had refugee camps, but we also had refugees that were renting. So we called them urban refugees in our report versus camp refugees. And before this trip, we didn't think there would be much difference between the camp refugees versus urban refugees, but we found out that urban refugees, though they can seem better off because they live in homes and they're renting, the situation on financial aid was just as the same. Urban refugees, we heard that it's the families from abroad that are able to send them money. However, it's been years since this is happening. They are not able to send money every month. Every single time that they need money, their families can't send it sometimes, so they're struggling with rent. One story that I want to share that really touched us was it was an urban refugee. They rented a home. They didn't have any families abroad, and they were able to somehow manage the first part of rent the first time they were there, and they lived above their grandkids, something like that, and they had about, I think, 4 kids. So we spoke with the father who was ill, who couldn't get medical treatment still till this day, and we asked, how are you able to manage rent for your family while you're here? And he said that his wife sells vegetables at the local market. And we also went to go see the local market as well. So I didn't realize in that local market there were also refugee women selling vegetables and food. And so whatever the wife makes that day is how they pay for rice for one day.
Mm.
And if the wife doesn't make anything that day, then they don't eat anything. And so the husband said he can't work because he's ill, and he's relying everything on his wife, who barely makes enough for rent, let alone rice for that day for their kids. That story really stuck with me till today. When he shared his story, it was just so trauma-filled. He had no emotions, and he was just saying it as if this is a norm for them. And we definitely cried. This trip was so emotional. Their stories were really hard to hear, and I hope he's still doing well today and his family's okay. So a lot of stories like that we heard. In Siaha, where there is very little notice of refugees in this area because there's not too many of them, there were refugees from all townships, Tantlang, Haka, Lautu, and Zope, mainly majority of the Chin State townships. A lot of refugees were settling in Siaha, and they raised funds to get schooling going for the students there.
Mm-hmm.
And no aid from international. Everything was just on them, and we went around each leader to have them share with us their settlement story. And all of them came to Mizoram after the burning of Tantlang. When Tantlang burnt down, they all fled here, and they said that they didn't take much with them because they thought they would return to Tantlang right away. It would just be 2 weeks or so, and we would come back. So they didn't take much with them. And then next thing you know, they're stuck in Mizoram for years. All of their home back in Tantlang all burnt down. They don't know what's going on. They haven't been back there since. They said that because they kept hearing gunshots at night, that PTSD came with them. So when it rains really hard, because we went during the monsoon season, when it rains really hard, kids are scared because the raindrops are mimicking the gunshot sounds. So till today, they're still afraid to hear raindrops because of what happened back in Tantlang. Just stories like that. One grandpa that shared this story with us said, as soon as my house burnt down, so his house was completely demolished, as soon as it burnt down, he took just 2 things with him because he thought he would return. And he said, I took my lai coat, the traditional lai coat. He took that with him, and his Bible, and that's it. And he got on the truck right away, that really packed truck. He has no idea where his family is right now, and he fled into Mizoram. And so he somehow survived with just those 2 things, coming into Mizoram with no money, nothing to sleep at night, just those 2 things. Those are the stories we heard from each refugee camps. And as we got into closer to Chin State border. Because we were meeting people from Tantlang and Hakka townships, and the language barrier was no longer there because we were able to communicate freely. Each story was just harder and harder to hear because they were just sharing their trauma and their experiences with us.
For our listeners, can you give a little bit of a background of sort of a primer of what happened the past 4 years or 5 years, and also sort of the struggle of the Chin people since?
Mm-hmm. So Chin State, located in Western Myanmar, has always been very poor, very impoverished. I had the opportunity to go back to Chin State in 2017 when the country was still good. So even when I went back in 2017, it was still very poor. But because I was still young, I couldn't really understand the magnitude of how bad the situation in Chin State was in 2017. So imagine now, years later, I'm back again, post-coup Chin State, and seeing my family again, which was really, really nice to see. But looking at their living conditions worsening since the coup, it was really heartbreaking to see that. Chin State majority is a Christian state. So by the Burmese government, it's very overlooked because it's a Christian state. Now, the people in Chin State, I would say there's a lot of anger, so much anger and just sadness to see how our state has come. A lot of villages that we went to see have uh, improved in a way that there are, because more refugees are settling into those areas now, there were more homes, more stores perhaps, and they can help out with gardening and things like that, and farming. So it has improved in that sense. But when it comes to food, healthcare, it's a lot worse than I imagined before even coming on to this trip. A lot of them have relocated to where they were born or their spouse's village. That is something that we noted. But again, like I said, because they're relocating to all these new villages, some are not always welcomed. And so there's a lot of tension between the IDPs and the locals, which was very interesting to see. In my mind, I'm thinking just Chin people in general. I was just thinking we're very hospitable, we'd be very welcoming, but no, that wasn't the situation when we went to see there. And how do you even fix that? I had all these thoughts because it was just very alarming to see that my own ethnic people are not getting along with each other, with IDPs coming into their villages. It's not even just the locals themselves, but it's the local leaders perhaps. They're struggling to accommodate everybody. There's not enough land. They need more tools. And so if they need all of that, then they need money, which all comes from international aid. So that was something that we noticed on this trip.
Tell me about sort of, the Chin people are not just one language, right? They're not just one tradition. Tell me about sort of what you know about, the Chin culture as a whole. What does it mean to an outsider or to somebody in Canada who is just trying to understand Burma for the first time?
Yeah, for sure. Chin State has 7 townships and 7 divisions. Each of these townships have their own languages, which is really interesting. Each language, sometimes there's even different dialects among them. So Chin State holds I don't know the exact number, but over 50 different languages and dialects, meaning that there is no one shared common language that Chin State officially, legally has. Its capital city is Hakka. And so Hakka is mainly what I speak as well and what I use to get around Chin State. But because there is no common language that we all share, Burmese is the main form of communication. So somebody like me who grew up pretty much in Canada and didn't get exposed to Burmese, when I went on this trip and I would meet people from Matupi Township or a different township aside from Tantlang and Hakka, I would need to communicate with them in Burmese. So it's a lot of cultures within Chin State, which is where misunderstanding can come in, especially with the language barrier. I know this generation in Canada, in the States where Chin people are located, a lot of us didn't grow up in Chin State, so we don't know Burmese. We wouldn't be able to communicate with every people in Chin State, unfortunately. So That was a very interesting navigation to do with the language barrier, just because there's so many different languages and so many different cultures, even within just one township.
So one thing that kind of struck me about what you were talking about, and also the report that the CYONA released as part of your trip, was this reliance on inconsistent levels of international aid. And I see that sort of like in researching other situations in Myanmar as well. The divisions that are put on to people in terms of like, you're an internally displaced person, but you, even though you left your home and you lost everything because you're paying rent, you're no longer an internally displaced person, even though you're struggling just as much as someone else.
Mhm.
And then there's sort of like these divisions, and then the defining of refugees varies by country as well, including in India. Why do you think there is so little or so inconsistent international aid when the situation has only gotten worse and worse and worse?
Something I've noticed here as well is, I would say, fatigue. As much as we want to help our people and send money consistently, there is a lot of there's fatigue because there's so many different, like I said, just so many different cultures that each, for instance, one village has an international community abroad that sends them money. We are giving money to the international community that is sending money to that particular village, but that's just one village. There is over 100 different villages that are organizing their own fundraisers, their own aid. And so now we are giving it to all of these so many different communities that are working abroad so that they can send it to a particular village. There is definitely fatigue in fundraising here. Everyone's just, we're all trying to help our people as best as we can, but we obviously cannot help every single village. We obviously cannot help every single fundraising initiative, unfortunately, just because there's so many.
We as the Canadian community or Western communities?
Yes, Western communities, 100%. And then there is like an aid specifically for healthcare into maybe one region in Chin State or elsewhere. And then there's one for your own village. And then there's one for education. There's so many different initiatives, which is great, but it does affect us, the people that are sending in this money. So that is where the inconsistency of international aid comes in. And unfortunately, some of these villages may not have an international community that's helping them. And so we won't know that they need help, but we get there and we realize they needed so much help, and nothing is improving because no one from the international community is aware to send it to that particular village.
What are people doing to sort of get around that? Like you've met a lot of organizations, right? And you met a lot of people facing issues on the ground. How do people who are running these civil society organizations or local NGOs able to manage sort of the decreasing amounts of donor money, or, lacking support, or lacking attention to their specific issues?
So when we went to Siaha in Mizoram, Siaha or Saiha, it was an eye-opening village, I would say, because so it wasn't just us, CYONA, that went last year to go visit Mizoram refugees. There were also other organizations that were there as well, which was really great to see because a lot of young people got the chance to see what the situation was like. And so everybody skips that area for some reason because there's not a lot of them. And luckily we were able to go see them. And so, because something they said to me that really stuck with me was, because everybody skips our city and then goes straight into the next city, which is where a large amount of refugees settle in, nobody knows what we need. And so we have not gotten an international help just because nobody has come and spoke to us yet. And this is what we need. And so that was their first exposure in 3 years since they've had someone from international come and hear what they needed. Then afterwards, we got the word out. When I got back to Canada, we spoke with different people from America and Canada as well, and showed them our findings of that particular city where it was being missed, and the help that they needed. And luckily, through our report, people were able to be like, okay, we can help. A church in I don't want to mistake the state. A church in the States was actually able to send money from reading our report, which was so rewarding to see. It was great. And so if we had never come there, then they wouldn't have they wouldn't have had any help. Same thing with Chin State and these villages. If somebody just goes there, goes see what they need, what the situation is, and get that word out back here, then I would say we would be able to improve a lot of these villages. So that is something that I took away. We just had to go there and go see what it is.
So you're a young person, right? I'm a young person still, technically. Did you meet with a lot of young people there?
We did, yeah. A lot of them were younger than me. They were like in their late teens or teenagers. And everyone we spoke to, they said, "I want to come to America and I want to study and be able." They had such big dreams. They want to be able to go to in Chin State. They wanted to go to New Delhi to study, but getting to that stage is so difficult because there's so much legal process that they have to go through. And if you don't have the money to obtain that Aadhaar card, then there's no way for you to your education in New Delhi. So a lot of them had big plans of that. And I asked a very interesting question to the students. I said, why don't you guys stay here, finish your education so that you can be here and teach the next set of students for this village? Why go into Mizoram? Why do you dream of going to America? And so I challenged him with that question, because something that came across my mind was, if everybody left, then who's going to take care of the village? Who's going to take care of the people? For people abroad, for us to come there every year, it's not sustainable. We're only there for a short period of time. So long-term wise, I'm thinking if everybody just leaves, then there's nobody left, no young people to continue the work being done in the villages. And they didn't have a response to that. They really thought about it and they said, that's a really good question. And I think we left that particular school with a lot of thoughts, and then the teacher continued teaching and actually went into a talk about what we had just asked, and asked the students to just think about what we had said, that they are the future of that village. And then in Mizoram, the refugees, the teenagers, their job was, if they were girls, their job was to cook rice, to make food for the elders of the refugee camps. And if they had a school, then they would go to school, and after school they would do household duties. Some of them, their dreams were just, I want to learn how to sew. I want to learn how to weave. If we can have some sort of weaving workshop for just us young people, that would really help us. And I was like, I've never even thought of it that way. I would assume they want to go to school and do big things, but they just said, I've given up on these dreams. I want to be here to help my elders. And that comes with just, no young people would say that if they hadn't endured so much trauma. So kudos to them for wanting to help the refugee camp. And I do hope everyone that I talked to they're doing okay. There was an orphanage in one of the cities in Mizoram that we went to.
Mm-hmm.
And this orphanage was all these displaced kids ever since the burning of Tantlang or relocation from different townships. Some of them had the pastor who overlooks the orphanage. He said that some of their parents, I don't know if they're dead or alive. I don't know where they are.
Wow.
They all just came to Mizoram and they had nobody. So I set this orphanage up. And that orphanage was graciously funded by, I think, a church in Europe. I forget which one, but they funded that orphanage. And so his full-time job is to be a pastor, but he overlooks that orphanage for kids who don't know if they have a mom or a dad now. They're so young, they don't really know how to feel about it. But the preteens one that I talked to, one person just cried with me. She was just crying because she had no idea where her parents were, and she was just sharing me what happened after they burned down their house in Tantlang. And so she's been living in that orphanage for ever since the coup.
So one thing you pointed out in the beginning of our talk today was also, and you just mentioned it now, people leaving Chin State, they're being airstriked or they're fleeing conflict, right? And they don't take a lot with them many of the times. So you said one of the individuals had only a piece of clothing and no identification, right? And I imagine that's the case for a lot of people who are ending up in India's Mizoram state. So, what is sort of like the life of somebody who crossed the border without much identification? Are they able to get refugee status? Are they able to get supports? As a young person, can you even go to school? Can you even get a job? Yeah, talk a little bit about that.
The legal aspects of that is so complicated. I didn't think it would be this complicated. If they don't have money, then none of that is possible, unfortunately, which a lot of them didn't have. But as you know, the Mizoram government was very open, and they've been so helpful towards the refugees, building homes and actually letting some of them work without some sort of status in the beginning, because it's been like 3 years since they've relocated. For some, each area and each refugee camp was different. They had different rules because that certain city had a different set of regulations that they had to follow for the refugees. So each was very unique to their own. One area that we went to, they couldn't open stores, their own stores, but
Hmm.
they could set up a vegetable stand or something like that. So it's complicated within just each different city, not even just the government yet. Getting that status is difficult if they want to continue living there long term, which none of them want to do right now. But a lot of them said, we've accepted the fact that we're probably going to be living here for a really long time. A lot of the refugees did state that they want to go back home. And the people from Tandlang, they said that because there's no longer a home, I don't know where my home is anymore. So we will just have to figure out a way to get the Aadhaar card to work and to get to New Delhi where there's jobs available. So it's very different. I can't even pinpoint you one answer to this because each city with their own different local leaders. For instance, the Young Mizo Association, YMA, and then there's also the CYLA. So many different organizations hold different rules for the refugees
In India, in Mizoram State.
in their
Okay.
respective villages.
And what is this? You mentioned an Aadhaar card?
It's still complicated. I'm still trying to wrap my head around this as well. If they want to say they're in Longklai in Mizoram right now, and they want to be able to attend a school in Aizawl for higher education, and they essentially want to relocate to New Delhi and go to a different country, Australia, Canada, America, or wherever, they would need to go through a process to get this Aadhaar card. And without that Aadhaar card, it's basically, I would say, is like our permanent resident card here. So they're not technically a citizen, but they do need that card for work permit or something.
Where are the international NGOs in this situation?
In Mizoram, a lot of, I would say there's a lot of help and communication being done between um, the YMA and certain international organizations. So a lot of organizations like the Chin Baptist Churches of USA, CBC USA, they do a bunch of work with the Mizoram government as well. Chin state organizations in Europe have done a couple work. In Australia, they've done a couple work. So when there's that collaboration, then it's easier for the refugees as well. And I know there was a lot of conversation going back and forth between these leaders abroad to the Mizoram government. During our trip, after our trip, a lot of different organizations came there as well from all those places that I just mentioned. And so I know there's conversations going around seeing what we can do to further help from our end.
Okay. You also talked about mental health being a huge issue amongst refugees and those internally displaced. Can you talk a little bit about sort of what are the services available to people on the ground and what life is like for them in that in
There's nothing, unfortunately, no mental health services that can be helped aside from the pastor that is in the refugee camp. So if there's a pastor there, then they hold church services and they hold just services specifically just to pray for a certain thing or so. But besides that, if they are experiencing really bad PTSD, which a lot of them are, then there's no professional help in terms of, I would say, the Western way of helping somebody who's going through PTSD. There is no equivalent to that in any of the Mizoram refugees, unfortunately. There's shortage of nurses there, health clinics, none in that any of that I went to. Childbirth, I think one woman died giving childbirth because there was just no medical aid in that particular refugee. And so that family went through a lot. Until this day, the husband just had no emotions every time he spoke with us. No emotions. He's still remembering that vivid image of his wife dying, having the birth. The child is he's good. Luckily, right now he's growing, but to the father there was like no words of comfort that I could even say because simply didn't know how to even fix the his pain.
Yeah, when things have become so bad, right, for people
Yeah.
on the ground.
Yeah, and when some of these refugees share their stories, some of them share with like I can see it in their eyes that they're imagining everything that they went through and they're sharing it with us. And so their body language said everything. They were fidgeting. They were obviously very traumatic of the relocation, but just some of them, it was just no emotions. It was like as if their heart has become a rock, and they would share it to us like it was nothing. And here I am just crying, crying, listening to their stories because I couldn't help it. A man was just telling me that an elder man was telling me that his best friend died, and he is just saying it so nonchalantly to me. And he's saying he doesn't want to be buried in Mizoram because he wants to be buried where he was born in his home beside his best friend. Just so stories like that, a lot of mental health initiatives needs to be in place.
What are the communities like there? Are people able to find community in refugee camps and IDP camps?
A lot of the refugees at first they struggled with the language because it's Mizoram language. They've never even heard of it. It's their first time setting foot into foreign land basically for a lot of them. So learning the language was difficult for a lot of students.
And the language in Mizoram is
Mizo.
Mizo.
So they're not able to communicate with their peers at school, and so they were often left out. They couldn't attend these school fairs that they had to do because they just didn't feel like they fit in. And then slowly they learned the language, and then they started being accepted. And they start having fun in school, which is good to hear. Something we heard from the teachers of the Mizo schools was a lot of these Chin refugees that are coming into their schools are very hardworking. So we heard a lot of they're doing so great in school, they're really hardworking, their grades are the best, even among the local students. So I would say because they felt outcasted, they tried harder in their studies to do better. And parents struggled at first with the language as well, and so they didn't feel included into these community church events. And so what some communities did was they held a church service specifically for the refugees. So they have their regular services and then just another service with the refugees themselves. And so they would have three services in one day. But that was their way of just connecting with the refugee community and also the locals. Now, because so much years have passed on, they have gotten used to the local community. They're settling in okay, and it's okay for now.
What's the kind of future trajectory of like young people or children who grow up in these new communities in school? Will they be able to get jobs? Will they be able to go to, further education? Will they be able to have other opportunities, or are they restricted?
Some areas with more strict codes for these refugees definitely will struggle. But for some of them, I would say there is hope in that they can finish high school in wherever they are, and they can go to ISOL to apply for higher education, which is what some of them have done. And that was really nice to hear. They're continuing their school in ISOL, and then if they want, they can even go to Mizoram University. They were talking about how the university also has very when we went there, they had a few refugee students that were completing, and then they were joining the school. So that is what most of these students hope. I'm not so sure if the rules will change. It could have changed by now, but hopefully that is something that they're able to do. But for a lot of students, they don't want to necessarily go back home into Chin State. Parents
Mm-hmm.
defer; they want to go back, but a lot of these students, seeing that they have pretty much no future left in Chin State, they plan to stay in or that they want to stay in India to finish education.
What were some of the recommendations that your report offered? And I acknowledge that your report was published, I think, in the fall, right?
Of last year.
Fall of last year. And actually, a lot of things have changed in the world since, including lots of cuts to international aid internationally. And also, there's a lot of, I think, in the Burma space and the spaces that we look at, one frustration we have is that we have to somehow compete, or we have to compete for attention compared to other international crises. And right now, India has just embarked on a war with Pakistan, meaning that their attention may be focused less on the humanitarian situation for Chin people. So why don't you walk us through some of the recommendations you made, but also your thoughts on how things should be changed, or if you would change those recommendations for today's world.
Yeah, a lot has gone since that report has been released, for sure. I'm just speaking on refugee camps and focusing on what they need and what they had told us. So many different areas need to be implemented. For instance, like I said, women and youth. There needs to be just a separate intervention to help just for the women and youth in refugee camps, such as the weaving or whatever workshops that they need, um, that can be implemented for all the refugee camps. Of course, healthcare is what they need the most. I would say right now, setting up health mobile clinics. I know I have a doctor in Australia who created her own nonprofit organization after she after her trip to Mizoram and Chin State back in like 2019. And so she was just so empowered to create this. Last year, she was able to do some work as well. So something like just being able to set up health clinics in all the refugee camps is so needed. Like I said, they don't have nurses, so they obviously don't have doctors there. Just as simple as like off the counter medications is something that would be very, very helpful for them. In terms of like education, obviously so much is needed in all of the refugee camps. Something that they said was, we would love to learn English from just like the Western world, the young people,
Mm-hmm.
using your own degrees to come help and educate the people there. And even having something very interesting, what one of the refugee teachers had told me was, when making like a curriculum, they obviously follow the curriculum that the Mizoram government has specifically placed for the refugees. Something she said was something like, in terms of being able to understand and navigate this current situation for young students, being able to teach them to that. And they said that we don't have the people that can teach certain things. So if Western people, young people from the Western world who got the education can come teach this sort of thing, would be very helpful, so that they can understand what is going on and what they need to do. And I thought that was very important for me to even think about and see how I can possibly help out in that sector. Another thing is food, of course. A lot of these refugee camps, they get sent rice, maybe like, I would say like ten rice bags within like 2 weeks, and it may not be evenly distributed. And so that is something that some of these families have experienced. And they would just get the rice, dal, and maybe like tofu,
Mm-hmm.
or that's it. And there's no vitamins in that, as I just have listed out the ingredients. So food wise, the Mizoram government, while we were there, some of them did get sent the food, but for some refugee camps, because there's so many of them, and there's so many in one household, there could be ten people living. Not all 10 people will get the evenly distributed food for dinner or breakfast. And that's just for refugee camps alone. For urban refugees, there's even a different set of recommendations that we need to think about, I would say. Like I said, a lot of funding from their families abroad, or some of them don't even have families to send them money. Luckily, the leaders themselves have a very nice set of data of who needs what and where it needs to be distributed, but not very effective, as you can imagine. So just a separate set of food and everything that I just mentioned for the urban refugees, that would be very, very helpful. And I'm not sure, I don't think we included that specifically in the report, but just having a separate set of interventions for these urban refugees and camp refugees would be beneficial. IDPs, I don't even know where to begin because they rely everything on international aid. So that would mean international leaders would just have to communicate more, talk to each other more, collaborate with different organizations, different people that are helping these villages, and figure out a way which sounds doable on paper and as I'm speaking, but actually implementing it is very difficult, I would assume. Sitting down in a meeting and figuring out which village and which set of IDPs need help. What are their concerns? What are their immediate needs? Figuring that out, I think, is the way to go before we can even go into each village at first.
So walk me through, and well, I'll just switch gears here. You were born in Chin State, is that right?
I was born in Aizawl, Mizoram.
Oh, you were born in Mizoram. Okay. So why don't you talk a little bit about sort of your story
Hmm.
for the final part of this? You were born in Mizoram. How long did you stay there? When did you come to Canada? Why
Hmm.
did you come to Canada?
Hmm.
And what did you do in Canada since? And sort of what are your reflections about
Yeah.
the two worlds?
For sure. I think me not growing up in Chin State is a very unique perspective for the research internship that I embarked on. I had a friend who was born and raised in Chin State, so her experience was different than mine. So it was very unique, I would say, very different. Even though I went back in 2017, because I didn't grow up there, it was all foreign to me. I didn't really know how to feel. Last year when we went, I just felt at home for some reason. I felt at home because I think I just had so much love for my family and for my people, and I just felt their pain and their burden ever since the coup. So I grew up. I spent a little bit of my childhood in New Delhi. Only stayed in Aizawl for 2 years, so I don't even remember it at all.
Mm.
But back on this trip, I got to see Aizawl for the first time, the place where I was born, the place where my parents relocated to. It was a very bittersweet moment for me. I grew up in New Delhi, where I also went to school in India for 5 years. So that's where I spent most of my childhood. And then we came as refugees. My uncle sponsored us to Canada, and so we immigrated here in 2008. I was 8 years old when I came to Canada. So I've been living in Canada my whole life since then. So I've never known what extreme poverty was like, what my parents had gone through in Chin State, what my great grandparents had gone through in Chin State. I would just hear it from stories. And my parents would always make sure that they knew where our background was, where our roots were, that we came from a very poor state, a very poor conditions where not all children of their parents' kids had food to eat. And so I'm so privileged. I'm so blessed to live in a country like Canada where I didn't have to worry about if I was going to have food for dinner one night or not. I'm very lucky for that. And so I think growing up, I knew these stories from Chin State. I knew the horrors. I knew the stories of other of my friends who had come into Canada from Malaysia, all immigrated, and they had even their relocation to Canada was far more extreme and worse than what I had experienced. Because for us, we just got on a plane and then we came here. When I went to school, being from Burma was really weird because nobody knew what Burma was. And I say what
Hmm.
because they didn't even know it was a country that existed. Didn't even know what Myanmar was or where it was. And so I would say I did feel left out because all of my friends had their own ethnicities and they could speak to each other in their own language and I didn't have anybody. And so learning English, fortunately, wasn't such a struggle for me. I was able to fit right in when I first came to Canada. And then as I got older, and definitely in the past 6, 7 years, I started to really take in what Chin State is, what the situation is, because it's still the same from back then. It's still a very poor state. Still not a lot of help from the government. And so when my parents took us back home, it didn't do much for me for some reason. I just wasn't mature enough to understand what my country is, what my state is. And so For me to take on this internship was super important because it is my parents' heritage, and my parents, both being veterans as well themselves, felt like I had a duty to be part of this revolution in fighting for democracy and freedom for Chin people. Back in '88, what my parents had gone through in that military coup, and it's happening again. I really understood the magnitude of the situation when I took on political science, to be honest, and just studying poli-sci and studying how different countries navigate civil wars, military coups. It really helped me understand what my country was going through and how much young people are needed. A lot of them, when we went, the refugee elders, they said that it was so refreshing, so wonderful to see young people come and talk to them and come see how they're living, come see what they're eating, what their life is like. Because they said that in the past, it's always been older people coming in, it's been pastors coming in. And so for them to see just very young people who are just starting off the world, in their words, who are just babies. That's what they called us. They said, "You guys are just
Hmm.
babies, but you have so much love and so much compassion to help our people. This is so needed." And so a lot of them said more young people need to come here and talk to us. And so that is the message that we bought on after we came from our trip. We did a Canada tour to 6 cities where Chin people are located, and we spoke with all the youth. We shared our research findings and we shared the stories as well. It was really um, fulfilling because a lot of the Chin youth Canadians are born in Canada. They were raised in Canada.
Hmm.
They can barely even speak the language. So for them to hear this from a young person's perspective, it opened their eyes. And after our trip, one girl, she was so moved that she decided to hold a fundraiser within her community to send money for the children for education in the education department. So I
Hmm.
know that that trip spoke to a lot of young people, especially who grew up in Canada, who has never gone back to Chin State. And a lot of them said that now one day I want to go back and go help our people again. So that was very, very rewarding to see that the refugee stories were touching the people's hearts.
That's fantastic. Is there anything you would say to the larger Canadian community? Actually, before we get to that, I want to ask you about what sorts of things do you want to take on going forward? I think you're graduating from your degree now, poli sci at UBC, right?
Yes.
And you took on this project and you guys released a really great report. Are you involved with the Chin community in Canada? What are your future plans if you have any?
Yeah. So prior to this trip, I'm being completely honest, I had no desire to work anything Myanmar related. It just wasn't strong enough, I would say. I knew I wanted to do something, but that feeling was not strong enough until this trip. This trip really changed the way I wanted to view my future. And not just me, everybody who went on this trip from CYO or from different organizations, everyone came back with just this urgent need to do more. And same thing with me. I said after my degree, whatever it is I'm gonna do, I know it's gonna be related to Chin State specifically, just because that's the work that I've been doing. And I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna do more work. That is all that I said to myself. I don't know what it is. I don't care what it is. I'm just gonna go meet the refugees again and go help them out. I'm set to have my convocation in 2 weeks. In the meantime, right now, for me to just be like, I'm gonna do something, that's a start. But so much conversation need to be held before we can effectively figure out what we want to do, because this is not a trip that you embark on and say, I'm just going to go there, go meet people, and then that's it. I'm going to come back and write a report. It's a lot more than that, because that was my first time, and now that I know where exactly I want to focus on specifically and where I think I can do um, the where I can have my set of skills used best for me right now, I am in talks with the CHRO, the Chin Human Rights Organization, in terms of humanitarian needs and education to refugee camps. So I want to continue my work with them and get more refugee camps helped out, get urban refugee camps helped out, and IDPs as well. But the first step in that would be honestly having more conversations. I think if prior to this trip and hearing the refugees' reflections, there just wasn't enough conversation in Canada, in America, and elsewhere about what needs to be done to help our people. And so if we just sit in those conversations and figure out what our plans are, future researchers can effectively figure out what they need to focus on. So that's something I personally want to do. I do want to go back to Mizoram and follow up with anything that I have reported in the research report. And we'll see where things go from there. Yeah.
What is your sort of takeaway from this, and what would you want to share with the broader Canadian, Western, beyond just the Chin community and beyond just the Burmese, Myanmar, larger diasporas? What would you want people to know?
If I say everything, that sounds impossible, but everything in that, like you mentioned earlier, there is just so little notice to this situation in general in the international community. And so Canadians, I doubt all of them are even aware of what's happening. I think after CBC News, after that interview was put out, a bunch of my friends had no idea this was going on for years. And so just more conversations, more international communities hearing what is happening is needed, number one. And so that would just really it would come in with us young people, just connecting with leaders of different communities and collaborating. So something I've done with the Vancouver Chin community here is after my trip, I said we need to connect with different people, different non-Chin communities, and get this word out, hold that fundraiser out to different communities as well. So that's something that's in the works right now. I know word is getting out to different communities. And I think if more people are just aware within the Vancouver community, then that's how the word gets out to different parts of Canada and the world. Something I want to say to the young people, especially if you are from Myanmar descent, I would say is go back home. I will say that. Go into the border area and go see the refugees, because before this, all we heard was just the situation is bad. This is what's happening. That's it. We've just been hearing it from parents' words. We've been hearing for me, in my case, we've just been hearing from in churches that parents are saying, young people, you need to do work. But the thing with that is, if we don't see it with our own eyes and ears, then we're never gonna have that urgency to help out. Same thing with me. And so now that more young people have gone into Mizoram and seen what's going on, the word's spreading in Canada and especially in the United States, which is great. And that is where we need to pick up from, getting the word out from young people to young people, because we listen better when somebody, not such an old person, is telling us what is going on, but from a young person, the dialogue definitely changes from our perspective, because we're in the same generation as well. And everybody that went back home last year for any of the different organizations, we cannot stop from just that trip. We can't. We need to continue the work here internationally. And there's a lot of work that we can do from here that we can still help out with our country and our people as well. So I think a lot of young people, I would say, have that mindset, oh, I can't do much because I'm located here in a whole different world. But I would say that is incorrect. There's a lot we can do, even if it's just like the planning side of it, or even it's just reviewing policies. That is so helpful, so needed right now in our country. And parents, I would say, we need to have more conversations within households. If parents are not telling their kids of what is happening, then their kids they won't know. That is something that we realized when we did the Canada tour, that parents were not having conversations with their kids about what's happening to their hometown. And so that's what the youth had said. It's just, my parents don't talk about it. And so we sent a message to the church, and we said, you need to be able to talk to your kids about this, because if they're hearing this for the first time, that should be concerning. And if you want your kids to help, which every parent does, then you need to start having those conversations. So more conversations just need to be held. This is what I've noticed.
Anyone who wants to read your report with the CYONA,
Mm-hmm.
or follow the continuous work that you're doing, where do they go?
For sure. Our website is cyona.org. And then you can just look it up under programs, the Chinland Research Internship, and it will be available.
Thank you, Millen, so much for having this discussion. I learned a lot. And it's really great to see from the perspectives of people who have been on the ground recently over the years, and to also know it from the community perspective, right? Communities here, diaspora communities have been the forefront. And, even though they've been doing a lot of work and putting in a lot of effort, the diaspora communities are always looking for ways to do better and learn about how we can further advance the situation in our country and make things better. Thank you so much for joining this podcast, and I look forward to talking with you soon.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks to everyone for listening.
Thanks, Millen.